On today's edition of the show, we're going to discuss how the Florida Panthers have not looked recognizable if you had watched this team from game one all the way to now. We mean that in a good way. We're going to discuss how the Florida Panthers, all throughout the postseason, whenever they've had an opportunity to face top guns, they haven't shied away from the moment. And we're going to get yet another series check-in with the radio play-by-play voice of the Florida Panthers, Doug Plagens.
You're Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into this Monday, May 22nd edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. I'm Armando Velez. You can follow me on Twitter at MondoMan12. Follow the show account on Twitter at LO_FLA Panthers and on Instagram as well at LO_FLA Panthers. And shout out to the everydayers who come back and listen to the show to get your daily Florida Panthers fix. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONAHL for $20 off your first purchase. So it's a game day, Florida Panther fans. Happy game day, which is so great about these one-day gaps when you're in the Eastern Conference Final. It's quick recovery for one day and then right back at it to get back into the action, especially with the Florida Panthers and the momentum that they have with winning both games in Carolina. I'm so excited for how FLA Live Arena is going to be on Monday night as they welcome their team to once again another 2-0 series lead because of course them doing it in the previous round against the Toronto Maple Leafs and then now doing it in the Eastern Conference Final against the Carolina Hurricanes. But I just come to the conclusion where when you think about the mission that this Panthers team has been on, of course, it's a journey, it's a ride that each team goes through. Their ups and downs, injuries, illness, which the Panthers, in their case, had a little bit of a cap situation as well, and the times that there are a whole bunch of miscommunications, whether it's a pinch in the offensive zone causing an odd man rush the other way or losing the puck right at the blue line as you're trying to break out, and then the Florida Panthers giving up a rush opportunity and the goalie's left out to dry as well. We're not seeing that really in this postseason run for the Panthers, and it's to the point where this team is not recognizable, and it's I say that in the best way possible, as the Panthers are just 2 wins away from the Stanley Cup final. And you know what's really cool? The guys over at Panther Prairie brought it up in their show that there's an opportunity for Charles Barkley of the NBA on TNT crew to be in the building for Game 3 at FLA Live Arena, as it'll be an off day in between the Miami Heat game of Games 3 and 4, which the Celtics look lifeless in Game 3 against the Miami Heat. And that's one thing that they had in common with the Toronto Maple Leafs. The Maple Leafs came to town and looked lifeless in Game 3 as well. I mean, remember, it was Kampf and Lafferty had those 2 goals in Game 3, and it was the Sam Reinhart overtime winner. And another celebrity that has an opportunity to come to a game at FLA Live Arena during the playoffs is Brooks Koepka, who just won the PGA Championship, his 5th major, his 3rd at the PGA. Of course, we all know what happened with him and Aaron Ekblad with the Cone situation. And of course, they reconvened. Aaron Ekblad spoke about how they talked before the Masters, and he was actually put a bet on Brooks Koepka. And want to say a public congratulations to Brooksy getting his 5th major title. But one thing I do want to discuss more about is the top guns of the Florida Panthers continue to face, of course, Bergeron with the Boston Bruins and David Pastrnak, Brad Marchand as well. The Florida Panthers have been up to the challenge every single time that they've had that chance, and in the second round series as well, where where John Tavares and Austin Matthews don't register a single goal. Mitch Marner doesn't get his until Game 4. William Nylander was basically the only player on the Toronto Maple Leafs who was really generating anything on their end, and the Florida Panthers were able to neutralize all of that. And in this situation, as far as the Eastern Conference Final, if you look at both game-winning goals by Matthew Tkachuk, it's been who have been the defense pair who happened to be on the ice for the Carolina Hurricanes during both of those game-winning goals. Brent Burns, Jacob Slavin. Of course, we all know the resume of Brent Burns being at 38 years old, still going, a Norris Trophy winner, and Jacob Slavin, who's a stay-at-home defenseman, very responsible in his own end. And of course, if you look at the replay again of the power play goal by Matthew Tkachuk in Game 2, Jacob Slavin gets stuck in the boards, gets his stick tangled, and that causes the Florida Panthers to go tic-tac-toe. And then in the first game, of course, Brent Burns with that turnover that gets it to Sam Bennett, and then Sam Bennett to Matthew Tkachuk for that game winner. And it's just really about putting the opposition in continuous bad positions to capitalize on mistakes. And of course, we all remember in Game 1 how the pace started to really, of course, slow down because of tired legs. But let's not also forget that there's a decent amount of a shot on goal advantage in around the second or third overtime. And right before the Florida Panthers even got the game winner, the shot on goal advantage and the ice was starting to tilt in the Panthers' direction too. So you were starting to see the confidence starting to build for this team, right? Even before a goal is behind the net, and you see just little itty bitty habits that the Panthers create for themselves that get them those consistent opportunities. And even sometimes when I'm watching games and it's not a goal that's scored, it's like, oh, I liked how they processed that play. Oh, I like how they made that extra pass in order to possibly try to fool the goalie, even though they make a save on that play. And you see how this team is learning to trust one another. And also, Alex Baumgartner wrote an article about the top guns for the Florida Panthers and the highest paid players being the guys to show up the most. Of course, Sergei Bobrovsky, the $10 million man, Sasha Barkov, who's here for another 7 years, 7 years after this year for the Panthers. Same thing with Matthew Tkachuk making $9.5 million. And it's crazy. I also want to mention how right before the playoffs even started, Aleksander Barkov was voted the most underrated player in the NHL. And when you're voted as the most underrated player multiple times, are you really underrated after all? I wouldn't say so. I mean, honestly, because I watch this team every day, and you guys too, you guys see the greatness that this guy brings on both ends of the ice, the full 200-foot game, like we say that old hockey cliche of Aleksander Barkov. But at some point, that underrated talk has to just end. And the reason why it's likely going to end for Sasha Barkov is the fact that, when not as many fans have as much eyeballs on the Florida Panthers like we do at least on the national stage, you're only going to see, if you only watch one team, if you're a Northeastern team, you're only going to see Barkov like 3 or 4 times a year and not on the daily. So your appreciation for someone like him, especially quick to lose pucks, to exit out of the zone, you're not going to appreciate it as much. But and he has a freaking Selke trophy to his name. Like, come on. So for me personally, that underrated talk has the freaking end. But also I want to discuss more about the timeliness of the power play as well. I mean, it's crazy because we didn't even mention in our post game recap with Frank Rikas about the first power play that the Panthers had was a little bit of a disaster, giving up 6 shorthanded shots to the Carolina Hurricanes as well. But it ended up being a good thing for the Panthers. Of course, once again talking about how conserving all their energy, and really the only goal given up was to Chatfield on that redirection right in front, and you can't blame Sergei Bobrovsky for that neither. And the fact that outside of that, the Carolina Hurricanes didn't see as much quality. I mean, once again, it was 20-8 in shot on goal advantage at one point, and then it said scoring chances. And scoring chances are subjective too. It said scoring chances were 7-5 Carolina, and they had so many more shots on goals. You got to love how the Panthers consistently create their quality chances over the quantity. When you look at that aspect of this, of just, if you're just talking about game 2 alone. And then Jon Cooper he was on the TNT set, and funny enough, he did not pick a Florida Panthers player to score an overtime winner, so we can't be surprised there. But also talking about him getting to know Bill Zito in the Stanley Cup bubble back in 2020, and getting to know his character, and an opportunity to kind of get a grip of who he was and how he was prepared for the job as well. And also, of course, mentioned his relationship with Julian Brisebois, his general manager as well, and kind of put us into the mindset of the communication between the coach, player, if you guys are in sync or not, how you feel about someone. And we can't definitely see the full lens of the Paul Maurice Bill Zito relationship. It's only in year 1, but you kind of get an idea of like what it's like to build a champion. And of course, with the Tampa Bay Lightning fall into the Columbus Blue Jackets, Sergei Bobrovsky's Columbus Blue Jackets at the time, I'm not sure if it brings necessarily PTSD to someone like Jon Cooper, but you kind of see how it's brought him back to that moment, and also the fact that he's likely not surprised to see that when the lights come bright, that Sergei Bobrovsky is right there to shut things down. And of course the preparation that happens consistently for this guy. Of course, I went on Locked On NHL with Gil Martin on Monday's show. Go check that out. And I spoke about really how what really changed for Sergei Bobrovsky was really 2021, when Spencer Knight and Chris Driedger were starting games for the Panthers in that 2021 series, and then lighting a fire under him. Of course, him having a kid as well really helped them really lock in. And of course, last year's postseason, he was the least of the Panthers' problems as far as the Panthers, and it was really the Panthers' inability to score, especially on the power play. So just great to see that Sergei Bobrovsky is just making those $10 million really worth what Dale Talon originally gave him back in the summer of 2019. But in segment number 2, on the other side of the break, we are going to be bringing in the radio play-by-play voice of the Florida Panthers, Doug Plagens, to discuss a series check-in as the Florida Panthers are up 2-0 in the Eastern Conference Final, as Game 3 is tonight, 8 p.m. on TNT. We're going to discuss that next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. But first, we're going to tell you all about Game Time. And buying tickets to your favorite events shouldn't be stressful. Game Time is the fast and easiest way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, theater near you. With killer deals on last-minute tickets, their best price guarantee, you can stop stressing over the tickets and get hype for the fun you'll have. Forget planning months in advance. Game Time has deals on tickets right up to the day of the event. Get exclusive flash deals on football, basketball, hockey, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. Game Time guarantees means you'll get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Get an image of your seats before you buy so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. Buy tickets in a matter of seconds. 2 taps and you're set. Tickets are sent directly to your phone, so you never have to dig through your email. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Limited tickets, last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. And welcoming in our special guest here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. He is the radio play-by-play voice of the Florida Panthers, here for another series check-in edition, Eastern Conference final edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Doug Plagens. Doug, welcome back for another series check-in.
Thanks for having me, as always. It's brought us some good mojo before, so we may as well keep it going here.
Absolutely, and of course, thank you as always for your time. Of course, 1 day gaps with the Eastern Conference Final, a little bit difficult this time around, but of course we made it work here to get you on the show. But first of all, I want to ask you about the first 2 games and the trials and tribulations that the Florida Panthers had to go through, not only for getting a 2-0 series lead for the second series in a row, but both of these games in Carolina, they were down 1-0 in each game. They didn't give themselves an opportunity to get down multiple goals. Of course, thankfully there was a goal disallowed on the Carolina side in game 2, and even in the Toronto series, they were able to at least win 1 game when they were down 2-0 in game 2. But talk about how the Florida Panthers, they're able to still continuously, even when they fall behind early, get and they're able to still manage the game and still find a way to be at ease.
Yeah, it's a trait that this team's really developed, I think, going back to the late part of the regular season. And this morning, before we hit the road back to Florida, during the media availability, I asked Nick Cousins about that specifically, just because this team has shown a real comfort level in close games, comfort level in overtimes lately, especially. We've seen this team just really play a confident brand of hockey in overtime. And he said it was just kind of a trait that really was developed as the regular season went on. And a lot of it, I think, can be attributed to the fact that the Panthers played so many games that, were really important down the stretch, to say the least. I mean, how many games did the Panthers play where they knew that, it felt like a playoff game, games late in the year against other teams that were right there in that race with them. And they were in a situation where they knew how valuable each and every point was down the stretch, and proved to be, because they made the playoffs by 1 point over Pittsburgh. So they were playing that playoff brand of hockey late in the year, and they were playing well, and they got comfortable doing that, and they saw the formula, they saw what worked. And I think going into the Boston series as well, that was the theme in the Boston series, was the team that scored first won the game. That happened in all 7 games in that series. The team that scored first came out on top. The Panthers were able to buck that trend, as you mentioned. Once they got to round 2, they had the comeback win there in game 2. And now here in this series against Carolina, they've fallen back by a goal in each game, but they've been able to come back and get it knotted up and ultimately win these games. And they just are very comfortable playing these tight games. Sergei Bobrovsky is a big reason for it, no doubt about that. His calmness and his composure is reverberating throughout the entire team, and they're picking up a lot off of that, and especially in the overtimes. And I think going back to the Boston series, game 5, the Panthers won that one in overtime to prolong that series. Game 7, coming out for overtime, I think all of us would say that coming out for overtime in game 7 against Boston, the Bruins looked tense in that game, and the Panthers just looked at ease. And ultimately, that's what helped them win that hockey game. It's a team that's just proven to really be comfortable, and it's a team full of guys that have been able to not only rise to the occasion, but everybody on this team has shown the ability to embrace the moment, and nobody shies away from the pressure situations. It's a team where you can see, as Billy Lindsay said on the broadcast last night when we were on our postgame show, mentioned that you get into these situations where you're playing for the guy beside you, and you just want to make sure that you're always when it gets to that point, everybody's doing everything they can to make sure that they're holding down their end of the bargain, for lack of a better way to put it. And you've got a full group of guys pulling in the same direction right now. They're a lot of fun to watch, and they're doing it different ways, winning these games, and it's been unbelievable to see. And again, they're just such a confident team right now, and it's showing every single night.
Yeah, and you mentioned about playing for the guy beside you, more on, of course, the whole cliche of the logo on the front, not the name on the back of the sweater. And of course, Sergei Bobrovsky, last 10 games, 202 GAA, 9.39 save percentage as well, in 712 minutes of play, and that includes a whole bunch in game one. And of course, there's that post from Awful announcing on Twitter about you and the job you did, of course, calling 7 full periods of hockey. I know you tweeted that you had done it on the ECHL level, multiple overtimes, but we spoke a whole bunch about. I've asked you before about how broadcasting games by yourself, of course, the hydration aspect of it. But here's the other part of it too for you, Doug Plagens, when you start at around 8:10 and finish at 1:54 in the morning, there's also another aspect to it, your eating schedule as well. And of course, depending on which press box you go to as well, and what's provided as well. How was that experience for you, not only as far as your mouth having to move at 1,000,000 miles an hour, but also that aspect too?
I really don't eat much during the game. And I will say, I think during the last intermission of overtime was the first time I ever thought about that. I was like, I'm starting to get a little bit hungry. Like, I always have a snack or something after the game. It's always, late at night when the game ends. And it finally hit me during that last intermission of overtime. I was like, starting to get a little bit hungry, but I really don't eat much during the games because I find that if you eat, it makes you even more thirsty. And, I'm already trying to drink enough water to hydrate and all that. But that game was a thrill. And as it went on, you just get so into it. And even as it went on, it was, first of all, the level of hockey, especially for how deep into overtime that game went. So much credit goes to the athletes that were involved in that game. I tell you what, on both sides, because, sometimes games get deep into overtime and it feels like maybe they slow down, or, it just, the level, the game can change, understandably so, because to say it's taxing on the body is an understatement, what these guys are going through.
No doubt.
But you're talking 2-3 into the fourth overtime. Both teams were pushing. Both goaltenders were having to make big saves as the game went on. And those goaltenders especially, they don't get line changes. So, hats off to what the show that both of those guys put on. I tell you, if you like goaltending, if you were just a casual observer who liked goaltending, then that was the game for you, because you saw Sergei Bobrovsky and Frederik Andersen absolutely put on a show in that game. But that was it was a classic, no doubt about it. I mean, there have only been 5 games in NHL history that were longer. 2 of those were played in the 1930s. So it's not something you see every single day. It's part of what makes hockey so unique, is that in theory, the game can go on forever. And it's not something that happens every single day. Again, there have only been 5 games in the history of the league longer than that one. So it's not something that happens every day. As it was going on, though, you did feel good about the Panthers' chances to win. And I think all that started with Sergei Bobrovsky, because he just continued to make the saves and he looked so locked in. And I remarked on it during the broadcast. But it wasn't just that he was making the big saves. It was how calm he looked in making the big saves. You'd see him go side to side, and then you'd watch it on a replay, and he just made it look so methodical. It was really something to behold. And he just looked so in command that you just think, okay, it's going to, at some point, the Panthers are going to get a chance. They're going to cash in. Sure enough, they got one. And it was just an example of why you go to the final horn, because there were 12.7 seconds left in that overtime period. Not a lot of time, but there was enough time to get a scoring chance if you made a good play, and that's what the Panthers did. They were able to force a turnover, and very quickly developing play, Sam Bennett to Matthew Tkachuk, and the game ended, and that was that. So that was a huge one. Rod Brindamore said after the game in his post-game press conference that it was the most devastating way to lose a hockey game when you go through all that. And from the Carolina perspective, you have nothing to show for it. On the Panthers side, on the road, to go through all that and get a win the way that they did, what a way to start that Eastern Conference Final Series. So again, I can tell you from my perspective, it was an absolute thrill to be involved in any way in a game like that, to see a game like that. and to see the Panthers come out on top. And hey, I got a ton of I got a ton of tweets, just a ton of messages and things like that from people with a lot of kind words. And I just want to say thanks to everybody. I try to respond to as many as I could, but if there was anybody I missed, thank you so much. Thanks to everybody who stayed up late with us for that one, because that was an absolute thrill. And I hope everybody, just like Paul Maurice is stressed throughout the playoffs, I hope everybody just took it in and enjoyed that. I'm sure it was pressure filled at times. I'm sure people were on the edge of their seats, but this team has been really special, and they're giving us a lot of great memories. And that game one is a game that I think all of us are going to remember forever.
Yeah. And definitely, I credit to also the people who were stayed at the watch party in downtown Fort Lauderdale as well, who they could have easily left early, of course, and there's a whole bunch of people who stayed there the whole time. And for me personally, waking up the next morning and having to do a show to recap game one, I felt so energetic, even though I got like maybe 4 or 5 hours of sleep after game one. Of course, the win helps, and the adrenaline rush that comes with it is definitely one. Of course, you mentioned Sergei Bobrovsky being locked in. You had a save on, I believe it was Drury, where Kotkaniemi was on his knees, and he got it to a backhand feed with a sharp angle, and then the game-changing save in game two where a cross-ice feed from Marty Necas to Teravainen, and he's quick to get it on that blocker as well. So just incredible what.
And the Necas breakaway in game one. That's another one that we're all going to remember. That came in the third period. If that one goes in, there might not have been any kind of an overtime period. So it's just an example of the margins being so razor thin, and these two teams are so good that it really can come down to one play here and there, one save here and there, making all the difference in the world. That's what we've seen so far.
Yeah, no doubt. And Bobrovsky definitely making the difference for the Panthers there. And it's just, you could point to so many different things that he's done. I want to talk more about the two top end superstars for the Panthers that scored, of course, the 2 goals in game 2 for Florida. And of course, Wayne Gretzky had a lot of praise for Sasha Barkov after game 2, saying that's one of the greatest goals that he's ever seen. And Barkov saying that I don't know if I could score compared to him, but getting that praise from the TNT crew from Wayne Gretzky, and of course Paul Maurice talking about how he's not really a flashy player, but you're starting to see a little bit of that flash with him. And I think a lot of that has to do with who his teammate is, and Matthew Tkachuk. And of course, Matthew Tkachuk getting the 2 overtime winners in both games 1 and 2. And the thing is, I'm noticing more, especially that Matthew Tkachuk's business is like a business as usual approach. Of course, you win, go off the ice within 30 seconds, maybe within 15 seconds of scoring the overtime winner. It's like, we're not done. Yes, it's great that they've won, but it's the mission still remains the same. It's on to the next one, because the ultimate goal is to win that cup. How great has it been that Barkov has had the flair that he's had, along with the praise of Wayne Gretzky, and of course Matthew Tkachuk with his business as usual approach.
Yeah, there's so many ways to go off of that. I mean, you look at Barkov, and that goal that he scored in game 2 to tie it at 1 is going to be on that a guy who's going to score a ton of goals in his career. We forget how much hockey he still has ahead of him. He's just getting into his prime, but in 15, 20 years, when we're looking at, when we're going back through the top moments and the top goals and the top highlights of Aleksander Barkov's career, that goal, because of the type of game it was in, the way he scored it, that was vintage Sasha Barkov, that goal. And came off a great setup from Josh Mahura, who really quietly had a really, really big game there in game 2 and made some huge plays that really influenced the hockey game. But Josh Mahura set up Barkov out in front, and it was a big opportunity because as we've seen against Carolina, who defends so well, it's rare for them to lose track of a guy, especially a guy like Barkov out in front of the net where he had that kind of time. And Barkov makes a move like that, absolutely froze Antti Raanta and was able to backhand it past him for, again, what is going to be a vintage Aleksander Barkov goal. That's one we're going to be seeing on the highlights, the all-time great Panthers highlights for many years to come, just because of, again, the kind of goal that was, the style, the flair that came with it, but just how big that goal was. And you look at the scoring so far in the series. The Panthers have a 2-0 lead in the series. They've scored 5 goals, 2 for Matthew Tkachuk, 2 for Barkov, 1 for Verhaeghe. And, you look at that, and it's for the Panthers in the biggest games, the guys finding the back of the net here in a series where goals have come at an extreme premium. It's the big guns there have been able to break through, and it's put the Panthers over the top. And you look across the whole lineup, everybody making the contributions, but Matthew Tkachuk with the 2 game winners, Barkov with a couple of goals, and Verhaeghe with 1 as well. It's been a great 2 games so far. You mentioned as Matthew Tkachuk is showing that the job's not done. They're well aware of that they're halfway there as far as this series is concerned. But you look at Matthew Tkachuk too. You talk about a guy who just rises to the occasion when the chips are down. And the Panthers have a lot of guys like that. Gets back to my point I was making about they have a whole lineup of guys where nobody shies away from the moment. Everybody seems to embrace the pressure situations, these tight games, overtimes. Everybody seems to be really comfortable in these situations. And I've got to think that, the captain, I've got to think that Sergei Bobrovsky, got to think that Matthew Tkachuk are a huge influence on the overall calmness of the entire group. It's great to see what they've done so far. And again, what else can you say about Matthew Tkachuk? This team's he's got 3 overtime goals in the playoffs already, and we're not even through 3 rounds yet. So he's found ways to come up with the biggest plays when the team needs them most. And you go up and down the lineup. I think we talked about this the last time that I was on the show with you, but you go down the whole roster, and every guy has had his big moment, his big impact in a game. I mean, you go all the way down the list, and of course, you had the Sam Reinhart overtime goal in Toronto, and you had the Nick Cousins overtime goal in Toronto, and you go down the list, and you've had just big contributions, and you've had every guy up and down this lineup being a huge factor in games. Brandon Montour going all the way back to the Boston series, which oddly, the Boston series feels like it was a really long time ago at this point, oddly enough. It wasn't that long ago, but it feels like it was. But Brandon Montour, when he tied Game 7 with, I think, like 59.3 seconds left on the clock, there are all these little moments along the way. We can't forget about the Sergei Bobrovsky save on the Brad Marchand breakaway in Game 5 as regulation time was set to expire. If that puck goes in, we're not having this conversation right now.
No, we're not.
Again, so many different factors, so many different things, but that's the Stanley Cup playoffs, and the margin for error is so slim, and every team is so good, and every team's got good goaltending, and every team's got a dangerous lineup, and that's why it comes down to one play here, one play there. And for the Panthers, they've found a way to come out on top in a lot of close games, and that's what it's going to continue to take.
Yeah, no doubt. And then of course you mentioned goals coming at a premium with the Barkov and Tkachuk getting 2, Verhaeghe getting 1, and you think about who the players are. Two players who have scored 40 goals this season in Verhaeghe and Tkachuk, and a guy who's definitely capable of course has, because of injury, he hasn't done it on the stat sheet in Sasha Barkov as well. And different moments has led to different turning points in games. And of course, the Florida Panthers continuing to rack up the wins, now 10-1 in their last 10 postseason games for the Panthers, and 2 wins away from the Stanley Cup final. But Doug, I want to thank you so much for joining me on this series check-in edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Game 3 being tomorrow. On the TV side, it's 8 p.m. on TNT. but I want to give you an opportunity to discuss the programming notes once again for tomorrow's Game 3 at FLA Live Arena.
Yeah, tomorrow, Game 3, we will be on the air at 7 o'clock on 560 WQAM, and of course, that means also on the Odyssey app with extended local pregame coverage. At 7:30, we start Panthers preview on the Panthers radio network, so 560 WQAM, of course, our flagship home, but you can also pick us up in the Palm Beaches on 92.1 Real Radio, the FM home of the Panthers playoffs in the Palm Beaches. So you can catch us there. You can always catch us on 100.3 Thunder Country down in the Florida Keys. Great affiliate of the Panthers that has been with us for a long time. And the southernmost station in Panthers Nation, 100.3 Thunder Country down in the Florida Keys. And, of course, you can always find us on the NHL app. Go to the NHL app right at puck drop, right at 8 o'clock, and you'll be able to get us there. It takes all the guesswork out of it. I mentioned the Odyssey app. SiriusXM channel 220 is where you can find our broadcast through this whole series. If you're a SiriusXM subscriber and you have the SiriusXM app or the streaming platform, channel 932, it's always our broadcast, so you can always find us there. But, on your drive in tomorrow, 7 o'clock, we're on the air on 560 WQAM, so you can listen to some extended pregame coverage with me and Billy Lindsay and Kevin Rogers there tomorrow from 7 to 7:30 while you're on your way in. And then, of course, we start our pregame at 7:30, and puck drops at 8 o'clock. And if you're tuned in, you can sync us up to the national TV broadcast, pause your TV at a whistle, hit play when you hear that same whistle on your radio or your app or your computer or wherever you're listening, and you should be pretty close to right about synced up there. So I know a lot of folks out there have tried that. I've gotten a lot of tweets, people saying it works pretty well. So thanks everybody who has given that a try. And if you haven't, that's what you do. Give it a shot. See how it works.
Yeah, I've definitely given that a try, and it's definitely useful for me. Of course, it's a little more descriptive on the radio side. Of course, you have to be to paint the picture. Of course, and
I know,
sure.
And that's we like to just give everybody the options. I can tell you that all the different crews that are covering this, whether it's TNT or for the Canadian viewers up on Sportsnet or the national radio broadcast, they have just outstanding broadcast crews handling it for all the different networks, TV and radio. But I know some people always do like to get the local broadcast. So just giving you the option there and just letting you know how you can find the local broadcast with Billy and I, because we're going to be with you every step of the way.
So if that isn't motivation to sync up your radio broadcast, I don't know what is. But Doug, thank you so much, and hope to see you next time, my friend.
Thank you very much for having me, as always.
And if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to the podcast to be notified every single time the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast jumps into your podcast feed. Don't forget to also subscribe to the other shows on the Locked On NHL network, including Locked On NHL, Locked On Fantasy Hockey, Flip Livingstone, and Steel Roden, and Locked On NHL Prospects. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. And for the everydayers out there, make sure to come back for Tuesday's edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. We will be bringing in Florida Panthers historian Francisco Aporta to recap Monday's Game 3 between the Florida Panthers and the Carolina Hurricanes. So I'm Armando Velez with Doug Plagens, and you've been listening to the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day.